Stephen Bucci from the Heritage Foundation is joining us. Always love to talk foreign policy with you, sir. And let's start with Israel and Hamas. I want to go back a couple of days to the hostage rescue. Then we'll talk about the plan that's on the table from the Biden administration. But the hostage rescue, there were 4 hostages that were rescued and a whole bunch of Palestinians that were injured or killed. Should I assume, is it safe to say that this was an instance where at least some of those folks that were killed, they were being used as human shields?
Well, actually, what's probably more accurate was that a whole bunch of those folks were shooting at the Israeli soldiers. There's a ton of footage showing people, everybody in civilian clothes, popping up at a tunnel entrances with rocket-propelled grenades, launchers on their shoulders, firing from windows in civilian clothes with AK-47s. This was a civilian area, right? There was 2 civilian apartment buildings in an area that is designated as a refugee camp, even though it's basically just a couple of city blocks together. There was a mall right next to it. You know, this is in the place where there's famine and all that stuff, supposedly. You can't see the air quotes I'm doing. But when the Israelis arrived to rescue the hostages that were being kept in these so-called civilian apartments, in one case by a doctor and his son, an Al Jazeera journalist, and when those people fought back to drive off the Israeli soldiers, they were killed. So I'm not saying there were no collateral casualties. Clearly there were. But when you hold hostages in civilian housing, what in the world would you expect to happen? It's kind of ludicrous, this pearl clutching and swooning that's going on over the 200 innocent people. They weren't innocent people, Dan. They were part and parcel of Hamas's structure to keep these hostages, to use them as household slaves, by the way, to do their housework, to wash their dishes, to come into their rooms whenever they wanted without knocking, without, it wasn't like they were guest workers.
Right.
They were prisoners. And the Israeli military went in daylight, which is really becomes very, very dangerous for the soldiers conducting that operation. And if this had been done at night, more people would have been killed, regardless of who they were, because it's harder to distinguish in the dark, even with good night vision, who's a soldier and who's a civilian. But I got to tell you, once you pick up a weapon and shoot back at those soldiers, you are now a combatant, and you are likely to be killed by these high-end commandos. So, to be honest with you, I'm not shedding a tear over any of those people that went down, and this ridiculous mantra you're hearing now. Well, this isn't proportional to kill 200 people to get 4 back? Yes, it is proportional because it's called war.
Yeah.
A war that the Hamas terrorist organization began and now positions itself in the middle of civilian structures. Whether all those people are civilians, that's for other people to decide. But I got to tell you, as a soldier, when they pick up that weapon and point it at me or my teammates, they are now a target, and a legitimate legal target under the rules of law.
I think it also shows you, Stephen Bucci, that if Israel really wanted to, they could annihilate as many people as they wanted. I mean, you're talking about they took out 200 people that were firing back at them. And so this tells you, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this tells you the might of the Israeli military. What do we know about the hostages? What kind of conditions were they kept in? What have they been talking about was their experience?
Well, it appears this is probably about as good a conditions as it can get. They were in apartments that there were Gazan families living in these apartments, also taking advantage of these prisoners and watching over them to keep them secure away from the rescuers. And but the report from the physician that examined them once they got back in Israel said they were all malnourished, not that they were deprived completely of food, but they got basically no protein. There were not there wasn't any care for the wounds that they had had from October 7th, because all of them had at least been beaten up, if not cut or other things. And so this was not a completely benign captivity by any means. It doesn't appear that they were actively tortured, other than the fear factor that's there. But the sort of consensus from the intel community is that these four, they're not expecting to find anybody in better condition than these, and they're likely that the remaining hostages are all being kept in much worse conditions, and possibly are not alive any longer. So this is it's a serious victory for Israel and for justice to get these four out. But this is not done by any means, and shouldn't be done, because there are still quite a few prisoners. And by the way, all of the American citizen prisoners are still being held.
Yeah, and we don't know. Do we even know what the hostage count is at this point? Do we know how many have died? How many are still living?
We do not. There's an idea. It depends on how optimistic or pessimistic the analysts are. They don't have hard numbers. Hamas is not that disciplined an organization. They're pretty dispersed, and they're trying to make it as hard for Israel to get these people back as possible. I got asked yesterday by someone who said, well, when are we going to send in our people, Delta or SEAL Team 6, to get our hostages out? I said, well, the first thing we have to do is find them. There was one sort of slip that perhaps America had assisted the Israelis with intel on this operation, but that doesn't mean that we know by any stretch of the imagination where all the rest of them are, or even if they're still alive. So that intel operation will be ongoing, and if we find, or if the Israelis find any that are still living, you can bet they'll be planning to go in and get them.
Let me ask you about this. I guess you'd call it a plan from the Biden administration. This is a three-part plan, and I realize I'm glossing over a lot of details here, but the first phase concerns a hostage prisoner swap as well as a short-term ceasefire. I do understand that. I've always been fascinated by the fact that the number of hostages that we get back, as far as the number of prisoners that they get back, it's always way out of whack.
Yeah, well, it just shows you the difference in the value of life that the Israeli society and nation put on their people versus what Hamas and their ilk put on theirs. Also, keep in mind, it's not just the numbers. The people that Israel is getting back are hostages. They're people that were kidnapped and illegally and during a terrorist attack. And what Hamas is getting back are convicted criminals, people that were given full up fair trials under the Israeli judicial system and were convicted of many cases violent assaults, in some cases killings, and that's who they're getting back. So there's not a moral equivalence between these two groups of people that are being swapped either. But yeah, you're right. Israel gives them back 100 of their criminals to get back one of their citizens. And that's, to them, that's worth it. They value the lives of their people that much.
Yeah. The second phase includes, and this is from the BBC, a, quote, permanent end to hostilities, as well as a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, according to a text of the U.S. draft resolution. Is there any real way to assure everyone that there will be a permanent end to hostilities from the Hamas side, from Gaza?
No, there's not. And frankly, in the other previous very short ceasefires that occurred, Hamas never stopped shooting at Israel. And then you throw in the fact that there's also Hezbollah, who are the other proxy of Iran. on the northern border of Israel that has continually fired not just dozens but hundreds of rockets into northern Israel since this whole thing started. So, if you get a ceasefire with Hamas, Hezbollah says, well, we're not part of that, so we're going to keep fighting. So this is kind of ludicrous. To be honest with you, I think this is a fool's errand right now. Netanyahu has said unequivocally, until Hamas is removed as a power within Gaza, they are not going to stop. And until they get all the hostages back, they're not going to stop. Hamas is counting on the international community to pressure Israel into accepting this idea that, okay, we'll give you back 5 or 10 and you have to leave. But then, we get to keep the others because that's still leverage for us. And I just don't think Netanyahu is going to buy it, nor is he going to care if the UN says, by gosh, Israel, you better do this. They're going to say, no, we're not, because our national interests are not being protected here.
Has Israel or Hamas chimed in on this particular plan that the UN Security Council has approved?
To my knowledge, neither of the two combatants have said, oh, sure, we'll buy off on that. Hamas, who would benefit the most from it, they haven't said it either, because it talks about them leaving Israel alone from that point on, and they are not going to sign up for that.
No.
Because their reason for existence is to not just get Israel out of Gaza. Israel was out of Gaza and had been for a long, long time. Their reason for existence is to destroy and annihilate Israel. And their leaders say they're not going to stop till they accomplish that.
The third phase focuses on the enclave's long-term outlook, and it would start a multi-year reconstruction plan for Gaza. It's 7:50. I've got to ask in the 90 seconds I have left, Stephen Bucci, who pays for that reconstruction, and what does that look like?
Well, it would be massive because of the damage that's been done due to Hamas living and fighting among the people. And more than likely, you and I will pay for the most of it. Not the whole thing, but for the majority. And we still don't have anyone who signed up to administer that process. None of the Arab countries want to be involved in it. And it's just, it's a joke. It's political theater, and I don't think anything's going to come of it.
All right, 7:51 on Nashville's Morning News. As always, Stephen Bucci, thank you very much for the spot-on analysis. Looking forward to speaking to you again soon.